Hi, my name is Rachel Gask, and I'm going to be doing my presentation on Anishinaabe oral tradition and the importance of storytelling. So first of all, I'd like to just take a moment to define what a story is. According to the Anishinaabe worldview, stories are ancient beings that belong to the first order of life. They were among the first beings that came into creation and are considered grandfathers and grandmothers to the people. Unlike many other perceptions of stories in different cultures, the Anishinaabe believe that stories are living, powerful beings that need to be treated with respect. They are the ones who hold knowledge from the very beginning because they existed before anything else. Stories have and still do play an integral role in Anishinaabe teaching and learning. Traditionally, Anishinaabe children were taught in a holistic manner, where it was an ongoing process throughout their entire life. And several methods of transmitting knowledge was used, including learning through experience, dreaming, ceremonies, and storytelling. Storytelling is rooted in the Anishinaabes' oral tradition, and those who still practice the oral tradition often transfer knowledge through traditional storytelling. One question that was raised during my research was what exactly can oral traditions teach us? Well, what I found out was that oral traditions often teach us the way things are or should be. They help to educate the young, particularly teaching them important lessons about the past and about life. They also teach about the origin of the people and the world. So another question that was raised in my mind was, who exactly tells these stories? Well, some stories can be told by anybody. Those are the ones that are about moral lessons or are meant for entertainment. But there are certain sacred stories that can only be told by an elder. And it's these sacred stories that are considered very powerful and are therefore carefully guarded. The time that these sacred stories, are told is usually during the wintertime because there are certain beings or creatures that are considered malevolent or evil, and the stories need to be told when those creatures are hibernating. According to Stephen Osborne, the author of Protecting Tribal Stories, The Perils of Propertization, so much of traditional tribal knowledge is contained within oral traditions rather than written works. Osborne reminds us that traditional stories themselves, like the oral traditions, are living, evolving bodies of what he terms historic knowledge. This knowledge is about the physical and spiritual components of the world and how to live in harmony with that world. Collectively, it is this knowledge that creates the distinct cultural identity. So then this idea of historic knowledge comprising a culture's identity brought me to the issue of cultural sovereignty. According to Lawrence W. Gross, cultural sovereignty is equally built upon language and religion. Gross explains how a crucial part of both language and religion are the sacred stories, and the control of sacred stories is a crucial element in cultural sovereignty. Like many indigenous peoples, the Anishinaabe are working towards revitalizing their traditions and culture, unraveling colonization, and establishing control over their culture. Gross states that part of rebuilding a cultural world is to rework and interpret the traditional stories. The Anishinaabes' approach to interpreting their stories stresses value over meaning, where the most important thing is whether or not an interpretation expresses Anishinaabe value. Most people are often very open and welcome to new interpretations as long as they still have the values remaining intact. In fact, many of the traditional sacred stories of the Anishinaabe involve a cultural hero named Winnebago. Recently, several new Winnebago stories are being created and reworked in an effort to resist colonization by combining them with aspects of Western culture. In our textbook, Our Knowledge is Not Primitive, stories are said to hold important knowledge. And in Deborah McGregor's article, Coming Full Circle, she explains that the natural world is an essential part of this knowledge. It is important to understand that indigenous knowledge is not just knowledge, nor is it a thing or a noun, as it is often thought by non-native peoples. Indigenous knowledge is the lives lived by people and their particular relationship with creation. Because of this, indigenous knowledge is something that is inseparable from the people who hold it and practice it, and the environment. Anishinaabe traditional stories are also important because they hold instructions that are given by the Creator on how to live appropriately and in harmony with all beings of creation. Wendy Genius, in our book, Our Knowledge is Not Primitive, explains the knowledge about plants and trees can be maintained and passed on through stories. Often these stories contain traditional knowledge about the origin of a plant or how the Anishinaabe learned how to use a certain plant. Other stories can also contain information meant to teach how and where different plants grow and how they can help the people. Stories and storytelling remain an effective way of teaching and learning in Indigenous communities. It can be difficult for non-Native people to understand just how stories function or how they can be used to teach. So I found a good example of this in Simpson's article, Stories, Dreams, and Ceremonies, where the author draws from the field experiences and interviews of Anishinaabe people by Julie Kershank. Kershank explains, I always brought questions to our sessions about childhood experiences, about seclusion, about marriage and childhood, and the woman would give me brief answers to my direct inquiries, and then suggest that I write down a particular story I wanted them to tell me. Usually such stories involved a bewildering series of characters and events, but with practice I learned to follow the complex plots and to understand that when the women told me these stories, they're actually using them to explain some aspect of their lives to me. So all in all, stories, as you can see from the research that I presented you, hold value and offer insight by providing a lens to see the past and having a context with which to interpret that experience. This is why it is crucial for the Anishinaabe not only to maintain their traditional stories, but also continue telling their stories and teaching them to their young. And by doing so, they can pass on traditional knowledge that exists in the stories, keeping the culture alive and strong. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something very important about Anishinaabe oral tradition and storytelling. Thank you.